The subject of this press conference today is more money or less money. Do we want more money or do we want less money? Good morning. I'm former Mayor Mark Mallory, and we're here to discuss support for Issue 22, which is the sale of the Cincinnati Southern Railway. Let me introduce who we have with us today. We have the Vice Mayor of the City of Cincinnati, Jan Michelle Lemon Kearney. We have Gwen McFarland, the head of the Democratic Party. Where's Gwen?
Here.
Over there. We have Council Member Victoria Parks. She is the President Pro Tem. We also have Mika Owens, who's a member of Cincinnati City Council. We have Shondell Green from AFSCME. And we have Ashley Harp, who is the spokesperson for Building Cincinnati's Future. Now, before we get started, I have to give a little history because I like to give history. I want to talk about how it is that we came to own a railroad in the first place. The first discussion about the city of Cincinnati building a railroad was in 1935. The issue was that there were railroads and rail lines that went from the east to the northwest, but there wasn't really good rail service for freight from the north to the south. So the concept was the city of Cincinnati would build a railroad in order to get an economic advantage over its peer cities. It wasn't until 1865 that the Ferguson Act was actually passed and construction started on the railroad. It was completed in 1880 and freight service has been in place ever since. Now, pretty much since its inception, Norfolk Southern has leased the Cincinnati Southern Railway for freight service. So 337 miles from Cincinnati to Chattanooga is what we're talking about. That brings us to today. Let me also talk about what a railroad actually is, because sometimes people get a little bit confused when we talk about the city of Cincinnati owning a railroad. We're talking about a strip of land that has railroad tracks on it, that has railroad ties, it has some tunnels, it has some bridges, and it has a lot of gravel, a lot of little rocks that hang out by the rails. That's to dissipate the vibrations that trains create when they run over the lines. But John knew that. He knew that. Absolutely. We do not, for the record, we do not own a single locomotive. We don't own rail cars. We don't have railroad employees. That is not what we're talking about when we talk about the ownership of the Cincinnati Southern Railway. It is a strip of land that has train tracks on it. It is leased to Norfolk Southern. Norfolk Southern has been leasing, as I said, this railroad since its inception. They're under a 25-year lease. The current lease will expire in 2026. The new lease would begin in 2027 if we lease it again. In 2021, Norfolk Southern exercised their option to extend their lease by another 25 years. Now, as trustees began negotiations for a new lease, Norfolk Southern made overtures about buying the railroad. They initially offered us, I think, $800 or $900 million. We laughed at that and said that's not a real number. They came back with 1.1 billion. We said no. They came back with 1.2. They went to 1.4. We said no. We continued to negotiate for a new lease. When they came with a number of $1.625 billion, our experts let us know that that was a real number that matched the value of our railroad. That's the point at which we entered into discussions about actually selling the railroad to Norfolk Southern. So if we sell this railroad and get more money, not less, more money, to pay for needed infrastructure repairs, we're going to be setting the city on a course for a great period of development and reconstruction, job creation, and economic growth. So this money could be used for all kinds of infrastructure, fixing roads and bridges, fixing crumbling sidewalks and streets. It could also be used to fix things like ventilation systems at health clinics, and it could be used to improve things like the fire station that is behind us. The spending of the proceeds from the sale must be done in an equitable way as we look at how the money is spent across the city. Mayor Pureval and his administration have made it clear that they view every initiative through the lens of equity, racial equity, which is extremely important. And so the sale of the railroad has to fit that criteria as well. So now to talk a little bit more about equitable spending and other issues, I'd like to introduce the Vice Mayor of the City of Cincinnati, Jan Michelle Lemon-Kearney.
I'd like to talk about two issues that keep coming before us, two questions. One is, why are we selling it now? Do we need to sell it now? Why don't we just wait? And the other is what Mayor Mallory referred to. Will the proceeds from the sale of the railway benefit Black and brown and underserved communities? So, we're talking about, $500 million of deferred maintenance on infrastructure, on our roads, our bridges, all those potholes, our fire stations, our rec centers, so much of the infrastructure, but that's really not the focus. The focus, and people have to realize this, the focus is on people. It's not just about infrastructure. It's not just about places and buildings and roads. It's about the people of Cincinnati. So we're talking about our children, our seniors, our families who are using these rec centers, for example, who have to inhale all that terrible air from those HVAC systems that need to be repaired. We're talking about people who live in South Cumminsville who are living near this West Fork incinerator that's filled with asbestos, and that's probably affecting their health. We're talking about our firefighters in these fire stations that are unsafe, where we have to put slats under the floor to keep the fire trucks from falling through. We're talking about roads where people are saying, people are running through red lights, they're speeding. Can you put speed bumps on our street? And we have to say, we're sorry you guys are in danger, but there's not enough money for that kind of improvement. We're talking about people. And we have a lot of people in this city who are suffering. If you're out there and you see that we have thousands of children in our Cincinnati public school system who are homeless, not couch surfing, but homeless, their families need economic opportunity. They need these thousands of jobs that these infrastructure projects will create. Union jobs, good paying jobs, where they have health benefits, they have pension plans. They need these jobs to help support their families. Our young people need economic opportunity. If you're out there seeing all this gun violence and everybody's throwing up their hands, what do we do? What do we do about that? Our young people need hope. They need economic opportunity. They need a bright future. They will benefit from these jobs as well. And so people say, well, why don't we just wait? Well, some people might have the luxury of waiting. But for a lot of our communities, there is no waiting. They are in need now. We have to address these issues now, and we cannot wait. Now is the time. Now is our moment. Now is our chance to make a difference. We do not have the luxury of waiting. Thank you.
The equity is critical for the Democratic Party, not for the party, but just for all the people in the city of Cincinnati. And when you look at the railroad tracks and where they're laid, they go through critical neighborhoods. This money will be allocated to help those neighborhoods and those families to move forward. And this is exactly what our Vice Mayor said. And my question is now, why we can't wait? We cannot afford to wait any longer to meet the needs of the individuals that live in the city of Cincinnati. And we have endorsed this issue as well as the Hamilton County Democratic Party.
And now we will hear.
Good morning, everybody. I couldn't agree more with my colleagues. I'm here to also talk about equity. When we talk about the sale of this railroad, it is a once in a generation opportunity. Right now, Cincinnati is $400 million behind in infrastructure improvements. And so this money will help us to improve each neighborhood. We will take a look at the neighborhoods that are in the greatest need, and of course we will take care of it. This firehouse behind us is so old. It was built to for fire trucks that were pulled by horses. And so our public servants actually deserve better than that. We must look at what is important to keep our community safe. So if we get this opportunity to improve the firehouses, the police stations, the sidewalks, the streets, the highways, the bridges, we should take it. And so I am here to encourage you to vote for this once in a generation opportunity to improve our community, to bring jobs, to make our place a better and safer place to live. Thank you.
All right.
We will now hear from Councilmember Mika Owens.
Good morning. Thank you everyone for being with us today. I want to first say that issue 22 is about hope. It is about the ability to deliver on that hope for our community. It is about transforming communities through a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity because we will have the resources to do so. At a time where so many of us are dealing with issues like keeping a roof over our head, having the income we need to live, mental health, transportation, access to good education, safety, and so much more, while all of these are certainly priorities that we have to address as a city, it is also about the ability to influence the built environment that residents experience every single day that is also foundational to a good quality of life. I want to see us transform communities in things like investing in parks and green spaces, rec centers, improving street conditions, making sure that basic services are delivered to every single resident without an obstacle. The equitable distribution of resources is a top priority for all of us, the mayor and this council. And I am committed, along with my colleagues and the mayor, to ensuring that this is a reality, not just for issue 22, but for how we operate as a city every single day. But let's not be mistaken. It is issue 22 that can help us deliver on that promise. I want us to look back on history and know that we did everything we could in this moment of time to give the residents of Cincinnati the community that we all deserve, particularly those that need us the most. Thank you.
All right.
Good job.
Everybody,
Good morning.
my name is Ashley Harp. I am the spokesperson for the campaign for Building Cincinnati's Future. And I encourage all voters to vote yes on 22. The facts are clear. By selling Cincinnati Southern Railway, Cincinnati will have more money to fix streets, more money to repair bridges, more money to monetize our community centers and public health centers, make our city better, safer, and more beautiful for all of our residents. This is even more important in our city's Black communities, which have been overlooked for too long when it comes to keeping up our infrastructure. The reality is that when the city's budget gets tight, Black communities were the first ones to see the deferred maintenance to the streets and other public properties. The infrastructure trust fund that will be created will give permanent solutions to that problem. I understand that people are hesitant to trust politicians to do the right thing with this money, but it is important to understand that there are guardrails in place to ensure that this money is not misspent and is accountable to the people. First, changes to the state law require the money to be spent only on improvements to existing city infrastructure. That means future politicians cannot use the money on build their pet projects on a whim. Second, expenditures of the fund will be determined and approved through our representatives of City Council. And third, legal safeguards by the state of Ohio will protect the CSR Trust Fund principal from ever being spent down. Selling the CSR diversifies the city assets and produces a reliable source of funding for the infrastructure improvements our communities desperately need, now and in the future. I hope that everyone will join me in voting yes on 22. I will turn it back over to Mayor Mark Malley.
All right. Woo-hoo.
Thank you very much. I just want to add emphasis to a point that was just made, and that is that the money from the sale of the railroad can only be used for existing infrastructure projects. So this would be things that the city of Cincinnati already owns, nothing new. You can't do an arena, Can do some crazy pet project, can happen. But I will also point out that that has been the practice of how the money is spent from the lease. It's been that way since the early 90s when City Council adopted the policy of only spending that money for infrastructure projects. But we had that feature, we, the trustees of the railroad, had that feature added to state law so that a future council cannot change how the money is spent. Now, are there any questions?
I got
Yes.
one for you on that very topic.
Yes.
Now that you bring it up, because we hear from the No on 22 folks, and you know this, and you served in the state house for many years.
Yes.
They say they'll just troop right up there to Columbus, and they'll get the state legislature to change things again. They'll spend it however they want to spend it. Is that possible?
Is it possible? Yes. Is it likely? No. Here's why. I was the lead trustee on getting the changes in state law that occurred, and I will tell you that it was very difficult to get it done. The people who serve in the state legislature are very astute, and they were particularly concerned about how the money would be spent, how it could be spent in the future. They were concerned about whether or not we would ever spend the principal, which we would not. And they made it clear that the process that we wanted for spending the money for infrastructure, existing infrastructure, was something that they agreed to. But they also made it very clear that they would not be in favor of allowing that money to be used for all kinds of new projects. So that is not a concern for me, because as tough as it was to get the changes that we got in state law, good luck to a future council who would go and convince the state legislature to spend that money on whatever they wanted.
It's not gonna happen. Yeah.
Vice Mayor Kearney, some questions for you. You sent out that email this morning, and there are some motions that have been filed talking about the sort of equity focus that council, or that some on council at least, are hoping to see. But the motion that involves any actual dollars is not going to be heard until after the election. So, how does that conversation, or how does that affect your support for the railroad sale if that piece won't even, voters won't know if that's actually going to pass before the election?
So we have, so Scotty Johnson said that his real concern was to make sure that there's equity. So he and I and President Pro Tem Parks have worked on these motions to ensure equity. Let me start by saying our city manager and our mayor have already said equity is the top criterion. And so we already know that equity is part of it, but this is to add further to that. So the one motion is for an office of equity, and that will be heard, I think, next week. The other one might be postponed until after the election, though I'd love for it to be heard next week.
Not postponed, it's scheduled for after the election,
yeah, so
because of the
I'm hoping
committee
that
it's
we
been
can get
referred
it
to.
on for next week. But if that discussion does wait until after the election, we still have equity at the core of everything we do. And so it's okay if it waits, but I'd rather discuss it now.
But to be fair, I think a lot of the criticism that's been heard is that folks saying we've seen the plan and it's not enough.
Well, when you look at, so the criticism has been that the plan does not affect all the neighborhoods, but when you look, that's not true. When you look at the list of projects, and this is just for the first phase of it, because infrastructure, this will happen, year after year after year, it does affect every single neighborhood. And so all the neighborhoods are listed, and all the projects that are happening in those neighborhoods. The other thing that is not listed in the projects is all the jobs. I mean, a big part of this is all the jobs and the economic opportunity that the sale of the railway will bring to Cincinnati. And we know we have a lot of neighborhoods, a lot of our, underserved families, underserved neighborhoods, young people that really, really need careers, they need jobs, they need hope, they need a bright future. And that's what this will do. And that's something that is not being talked about enough. I'm glad Shondell mentioned jobs, because that's those thousands of jobs, that's a key part of this, but also the infrastructure in all of our neighborhoods, including our black and brown neighborhoods.
Now, it's my understanding the city doesn't require that
Right.
contractors
I'm
employ
sorry,
Cincinnatians.
President Pro Tem Park said, for the equity motions that we're doing, we're talking about the Rising 15 neighborhoods. We call them the Rising 15. They're really the neighborhoods that are socioeconomically at the bottom, and those are the ones that we're saying we want extra money put into. So that discussion is already happening, whether it's before council or not. Council members are discussing it. I see a lot of support for it.
And to clarify, the 15 neighborhoods, that's the motion that will be considered after the election. But going back to
Unless we can push it to get considered next week, but it is being discussed as we speak.
going back to
There's a
the
lot of
jobs,
support.
the city, as far as I know, doesn't have any requirement that contractors hire within Cincinnati, and it's not uncommon for groups outside of the city, you know, even right outside of the city, just in the tri-state area, to come in. So I guess where's the evidence that, you know, when the claim that there will be thousands of jobs brought by this, are they jobs for Cincinnatians?
They
What's the
are.
promise
so,
there?
Yeah, so this is something the council has said we want, that we want people hired, and I know Mayor Mallory wants to weigh in on this too, but we have insisted we want people